everybody, it's Courtney, and today I'm going to be using the Snow Buddies stamp set by Miss Ink Stamps. And I'm sure you've all had stamp sets or come across stamp sets where you can't decide which images to use, so you want to use them all. So I'm going to create 3 little mini scenes all on one card panel. So I'm kind of separating my scenes here using my grid mat to make sure that they're all evenly spaced. And I just drew some light pencil lines there. So I'm going to start with my top little scene here, and I'm going to pretty much do all of these the same. I went ahead and laid out some Post-it note tape right along my pencil line, and now I'm taking some Ink-a-Dink-a-Doo masking paper and I'm just cutting a wavy line, and this will be where my snowbank is. So I'm going to go ahead and line that up, and I'm going to start with my sky with some Distress Oxides. I'm using Spun Sugar, Warren Lipstick, and Shaded Lilac. So I really liked how my non-traditional colors looked in my last card or a couple of cards ago, so I decided to try that again. I'm going to be using a Blending Buddy brush by Trinity Stamps, and I initially started off with the Warren Lipstick, then moved on to the Spun Sugar, then the Shaded Lilac, and realized that the Shaded Lilac is just a little bit too dark. So I ended up switching out my colors, or switching around my colors, I should say. So I'm using the Warren Lipstick in the middle instead of the Spun Sugar. And I'm able to do that because I'm laying out such a light color or light amount of color. I'm slowly building that up. So because I did that, I can go ahead and go over that whole area with the Warren Lipstick and then save that bottom for the Spun Sugar. Now I went directly over the Shaded Lilac with the Warren Lipstick just because it was a little too purpley for me. Little bit too much. So I kind of lightened it up and pinked it up a little bit with the Warren Lipstick. Next, I'm going to go ahead and finish off with that Spun Sugar on the bottom, and I can remove my mask for that snowbank, but I'm keeping my Post-it note tape there. I'm going to take a little bit more of that Shaded Lilac, and I'm dabbing off on my scrap piece of paper because I don't want a ton of ink on my blending brush, and I'm just going from the Post-it note tape up just a teeny tiny bit. It's probably going to be barely noticeable until you actually remove the Post-it note tape, and you'll be able to see where that snowbank begins. I'm going to shift down my Post-it note tape here to the next pencil line and mask out the top portion as well as the bottom portion. Again, right on that pencil line. And I'm going to do the same thing, except for this time, I'm going to use that other piece of Ink-a-Dink-a-Doo masking paper. I guess you could call it the negative piece, just so that my snowbanks aren't exactly the same. So this time I am going to start off with that Spun Sugar and go in the proper direction and the proper order of my colors, and going to lay out that Warren Lipstick, then that Shaded Lilac on the top, and then again working my way in reverse, making sure that these colors blend together. First time around, I kind of just lay everything out, and then I'll work my way down and make sure that they actually blend. Then I'll go ahead and again remove that little snowbank mask there and just add a tiny bit of that Shaded Lilac where my snowbank begins to separate out my little scenes. So once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and shift again my Post-it note tape. This time I won't have any on the bottom, but I'm going back to that original mask that I used. I'm just going to kind of shift it off to the side a little bit more. So again, it's not exactly the same as the top one. And I did my ink blending for the sky the same exact way. So I'm not going to show you that again. However, being we don't have the Post-it note tape on the bottom, I'm just going to use the edge of the cardstock, the edge of my card panel, to add just a little bit of shading with that Shaded Lilac for my snow. So once that was done, I'm going to go ahead and remove all of those masks, and I wanted to have a little bit of snow in my background, so I'm going to take some titanium white gouache by Arteza and a paintbrush, and this is just a number 2 round brush, adding that a little bit of water to that to kind of dilute that. And I probably should have done this while my masks were in place, but I'm just going to use a scrap piece of paper to kind of mask off those white areas that separate all my little scenes, and just spattering on some of that watered down gouache in the background to make this look like it's falling snow. Now this panel will take a little bit of time to dry. Not only do we have a ton of Distress Oxide on there, but we also have this gouache. So I'm going to go ahead and put this aside while we stamp out the images and get those all colored. So I'm going to be using Blackout ink by Ink on 3 because it is a Copic safe ink, and I'm stamping on a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I didn't bother to take out my MISTI. I'm just using an acrylic block for this, but I stamped pretty much all of the images, I think, except for the snowflakes at this point, but all of my little characters, the bunnies, the mice, and the little hedgehogs, as well as the little snowmen. And then we're going to jump right into the coloring, and I'm not going to show you all of the coloring because a lot of this is a little repetitive, but I'm going to start off with the little hedgehog down at the bottom, and I'm just going to show you one because I colored them pretty much the same way with the same color combination. So for the main part of his little body here, I'm starting off with my lightest color, which is the E30, and I'm just mapping out my darkest areas. I'm not worried about my coloring being perfect because I want these to be a little bit lighter. I have a really light background, so I'm not going to get as much contrast as sometimes I get with my coloring because my images are going to be lighter. But I am still using that scary dark color, which is that E37, but I'm using it in the very, very darkest areas more sparingly than I normally do. I'm going to blend that out with the E33, then the E31, and then I'll move back to that E30 and I'll blend all of these areas out. Now for maybe this isn't a hedgehog, maybe it's a porcupine. Now that I'm thinking about it, whatever it is, for the back of him, I'm going to bring in that E37 and these little spiky areas. I'm just going to go pretty much directly over that with some flicking motions and blend those out with the E33 a little bit, and then finish off with the E31, kind of just fill in that entire area. Again, color the other one pretty much the same exact way. And for the little mice, I'm going to be using some C markers here. And these are pretty small, so I'm only using 3 different colors here. And I'm going directly in with my darkest color. Grays tend to blend very well together without having to saturate the paper first. And there's not a whole lot of area to work with. And if I oversaturate, I might lose my contrast. So for the inside of his little ears, I'm just going to color them in solid with that C1 and then go in with an R20. The C1 is just going to kind of make it so that the pink is not so bright, but that's totally optional. For the little bunnies, I'm going to move on to some warm grays. And again, my darkest color is going to be a pretty dark color, but I'm only putting this very, very sparingly in the shadows. Basically where his arm is overlapping his body, where his one foot is behind him. And then I'm going to go in with the W5 and extend those areas out a little bit further. And I'm leaving a larger highlight than I normally do. Like I said, I want these images to be fairly light. So just keeping a larger highlight area than normal, that's going to achieve those results. So blending that out with the W3, and then my highlight color is going to be the W1. And I'm just going to get all of these warm grays to blend. For their little tummies and the inside of their ears, I'm also going to use that R20. And again, I did cover that up with the W1 just to kind of tone down that R20 a little bit. Next, we're going to move on to the snow. For the little snowmen, first I did their tails, their little cotton tails with the C3 and C1. So for the snow, I'm going to bring out some V markers, and these V markers are going to closely match the shaded lilac that we used to shadow our snow for our scene. So I'm going in with a pretty dark color here, and I'm just going to keep a center highlight, and I'm going to add a little bit of shading on either side and where the head is over the rest of the body. And then I'm going to blend that out with 2 more V markers, the lightest being the V20. And you can see that I have a big difference between the V20 and the white paper. So I'm going to quickly go over that area with a colorless blender. This is going to tone it down a lot, but it's also going to give you a seamless blend between your color and your white paper. Going to do the same thing for this little cheese snowman, I guess you could call it. And I'm just going to add a little bit of shading where it's kind of indented in off to the left-hand side and the top portion where it meets the side. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to quickly go over that area with the colorless blender and get more of a seamless blend. Same thing for this little bunny snowman, just a little bit of shading on either side and with those same 3 colors, and then quickly going over that area with the colorless blender. Now this one little bunny as well as one of the mice are holding a snowball. It looks like the bunnies kind of rolling the snow. So I'm going to use the same colors for that as well. And I'm just going to add a little bit of shading underneath where the bunny's nose is kind of hanging over that snowball, and also where he's holding onto it. Off to the right hand side, you'll notice that it's kind of indented in a little bit, and I'm also going to add a little bit of shading there just to give it a little bit of shape and a little bit of texture. But I will still finish off with that colorless blender to kind of get that seamless blend. Next, I'm going to go ahead and color in everything else. I'm going to start off with the little carrots. And there's not going to be a whole lot of contrast on these either because I want these to be light. Oh, actually I lie. First I started with their arms, and I'm just using two colors here, the E55 and E53. And then we'll move on to the little carrot, and I'm using 3 different YR markers, and these are part of a natural blending family. So typically when you use a natural blending family, you don't get a whole lot of contrast if you're not using that scary dark color anyway. And in this case, I'm not using the scary dark. I'm just going to add a little bit of shading to the bottom portion of the carrots, and also those little lines, or the little lines that are in carrots. I'm going to add a little bit of shading to that as well. Next, I'm going to bring in my green combination, and I'm going to use the same green combination for everything. For these little leaves, as well as the top portion of this carrot, I'm just going to add one little flick of that dark color, blend that out with the G02, and then finish off with the G00 for my lightest color. Then I'm just going to kind of use these greens for some of the scars and the little earmuffs on one of the mice, and kind of just, I'm going to mix and match it. But while I'm doing this coloring, I also want to announce another giveaway for the 25 Days of Christmas card series. This time I have been doing gift cards all along just because I feel like it's easier for international viewers to receive a gift card. They don't have to wait who knows how long for anything to be delivered, and they can kind of shop at their convenience. It's just easy to email everything. So this time I am going to be giving away a $25 gift card to Simon Says Stamp. And if you are watching this right around the time I upload it, go and check them out, because if you purchase anything from Miss Ink Stamps, you will receive a free stamp set also by Miss Ink. So if this stamp set or any of the other stamp sets by Miss Ink are interesting or piqued your interest, go check that out and get your freebie. So I'm just finishing up with the greens now, and for this hat that this little guy is holding, or not holding, he's wearing, I'm going to use some gray markers. And again, I don't want this to be overly dark, but I want to make it look kind of like it's supposed to be black. So I'm just adding a little bit of shading with some C markers on either side, because this would be a round object. So I am keeping that strong center highlight. Next, we're going to move on to the red combination, and it's not really red, but it's kind of red, I guess. But I wanted everything to be light again. So I'm starting off with the R24, which is definitely red, but this is going to be my darkest color. And I'm pretty much adding the shading the same areas as I added the green shading. Next, I'm going to blend that out with the R22, and then I'm going to finish off with that R20, which is clearly a pink. So that's just going to kind of tone everything down, and that R24, which is the only true red that I'm using, is just going to be my shadow color. But I'm basically putting my shadows in the same areas as I did for the greens. Wherever one part of a scarf is laying behind another, that's going to have a shadow. And also where it's wrapped around their little necks, there's going to be a little bit of a shadow there as well. For this little Santa hat or Santa type hat that this mouse is holding, it's bent. So I'm going to add one little flick with that dark color where the hat is bent, just to keep that shape of it. Just going to add a little bit of shading to either side of this little band or ribbon or whatever it is around this hat. And then finally just going to add a little bit of color to everybody's cheeks with that R20. And all I'm doing is just adding one little dot. So I'm going to finish off with some white gel pen details, and also fixing any coloring mistakes that I've made. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my scan and cut to cut all of these images out. You can certainly fussy cut them, and I usually don't mind fussy cutting. I was just feeling a little lazy today, so I brought out my scan and cut to cut all of these images out. Next, we're going to kind of arrange everything onto the card panel to kind of see how we want everything before we make anything permanent. So I'm creating my little scenes here and realized that once I put the mice down, because they're so tiny, that scene looked very empty in comparison to the others. So I'm going to stamp out some more of the images from the stamp set, and I'm going to, there's like a little stick with some leaves and berries on it, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp that out, as well as a couple of these little snowballs, and I colored them the same way, so I'm not going to show you the coloring of these, but this will kind of fill in that empty scene on the top. I went ahead and ran that through my scan and cut as well. I probably could have definitely fussy cut these, being there's so few of them, but I liked that much better. It kind of filled in the sides, and I'll just have this one mouse holding this little stick. So before I pop any of these up, I'm going to go ahead and stamp out my sentiment, and this is from the same stamp set, and I'm just going to stamp this in between two of my scenes towards the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and stamp this with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. This is a fast drying pigment ink, but it is a pigment ink, so it's not going to dry immediately like dye ink would, so just keep that in mind. Don't kind of smear your finger over it for probably just a minute or two. So I'm going to use some Scotch foam tape to pop up all of my little images. I'm kind of keeping the little snowmen or snow critters, I guess you could call them, in the center, and putting my little characters on either side of them all the way up the card. And you can certainly glue these down flat, but I decided to pop all of my little characters up. And then once I got towards the top, I wanted the little snowballs to be flat, so that way it will kind of differentiate between the actual little characters. So I'm going to use my little jewel picker thing. I don't have a good one. I think I spent like $1 or $2 on it, so it's not the best, but I'm using my Tombow Mono multi glue to adhere these flat, and then I will use that Scotch foam tape to pop up the remaining characters. Last, I finished off with just adding a little bit of a shadow underneath each one of these little characters with a C3 marker, and I did go over some of the areas by accident. So I just finished or filled that in with a white gel pen, and you'll never know the difference. And then last, I added some shimmer to just the snow areas. But that is it. That is the card for today. In order to be entered in the giveaway, just leave a comment below. I don't care what your comment is, but I will pick a winner this Friday on Black Friday, and it will be announced in the community section of my YouTube channel. Thanks, everybody. Bye.